Hello everyone and welcome back to my series of videos making a small pipe organ from scratch. This is part 5B or part 2 of the pipe making process. I hope you've watched the first one, which will make more sense. This next video will make more sense if you've seen that one first. Not essential, but would probably advise, if possible, to watch that one first. Anyway, I'm in the middle of a field in Wiltshire in southwest England. With one of my organs in this tiny little church here. That's a tiny festival run by Maggie Faultless, violin professor at the Academy of Music in London. It's a scorching day here. England is in the throes of a heat wave at the moment in July 2025. And anyway, we're on to the second part of the making pipes, gluing the sides and the fronts and the back and making up the bodies in preparation for putting the stoppers and the feet in, which will be part 3. Anyway, enjoy, and if you could like and subscribe, it will make a huge difference to try and spread this series to, well, further afield, which would be great. Thank you for watching.
Okay, so we've got the blocks, we've got all the sides, we've got the fronts and the backs. So the first thing we'll do is to glue the sides on to the blocks and to the spacer at the other end. The spacer obviously is the same size as the block, so we get a parallel pipe. So it's all in the setup. We've set up the clamps. We've got one clamp at the top and 2 clamps on the block. These are homemade clamps. They've got different sizes. This is bottom C of the 8-foot. There they are. They range from, well, I tend to have one clamp per octave. So now I'm sizing the inside of the pipes. Basically, we have to be absolutely sure that the wood isn't porous in any shape or form. If it's porous, it'll leak, and it will not. It'll be like having a split in the pipe. It won't speak. It'll be like having an unsound stopper. The first thing you check if you have a problem with a wooden pipe, or the metal pipe as well, but we're dealing with wooden pipes here, is to see if, firstly, if it's not speaking properly, you check the stopper, and if the stopper's sound, then you check for splits. And if the pipe isn't sealed, completely sealed, it will not speak properly. So I tend to, rather than pre-size the sides, I size it with the same process, gluing the blocks on with unwatered down. I was taught to use sizes. Well, size is basically watered down glue, but it's much quicker and easier if I just use the glue itself. So I put glue on the whole of the inside of the plank. That takes care of that. So we don't over tighten these clamps. It's just not necessary. Just need a little bit of oozing glue. That's all we need to see. It's crucial that, well, it's not crucial, but it's much better if we spend a lot of time here with the process of making sure the block is in the right place, because then it takes far less time cleaning up when you take the clamps off. So now we're on to the tenor C. We'll just work our way through the octaves. I'm going to fast forward through it because it's just to give you an idea of the length it takes to make these pipes. It's very, very time consuming. There they are, all standing up, ready to be taken off and planed down. We'll just do one more from a different angle. You can see all the blocks. This is the 4-foot now, bottom C on the 4-foot. Now you notice with the blocks, the bottom 6 blocks, the biggest blocks, have different cappings or different veneers on them. They're oak veneers. They're for the front 6 front pipes, which are oak. So I've used oak rather than mahogany. So we're using the ordinary glue, the type bond again. Make sure it's completely covered. using the next set of clamps. That's the next smaller set of clamps for the next octave up. So I'm taking a bit of trouble just making sure that space is in the right place, because as I said before, it makes it much easier to clean the pipe up, and it's much more, if you can get as accurate as you can at this stage, it saves time. And the same with the block. So there's the bottom C, the 4-foot. And we move on to the next C, an octave higher, smaller clamps. Exactly the same process though. Sizing the inside of the planks first. Using the next size clamps to clamp it. And making sure the setting the clamps before you put the glue on, it's just good practice. I'll let this run and fast forward just to give you an idea of how repetitive this can get. Time for a good audio book. Now getting fiddlier and fiddlier the smaller they get, until you get down to the top pipes on the 4-foot, which are very fiddly. These are the smallest clamps, but exactly the same process. So once we've glued all the sides to the blocks and the glue is dried, we just clean them up, front and back. The bigger pipes will be put over the planer thicknesser, but the smaller ones were too small, so we just use the block plane for that. Now we've got to set up the front bevel. So again, I'm looking at my spreadsheet. I'm looking at the length of the bevel, the height of the bevel, which I'll mark first, just with a pencil. Now this mark will be used on the router jig in a minute. You'll see what the relevance of that is. And then we mark the cut up for the mouth, for the upper lip. This is set on this at 1 in 4, so it's a quarter of the height, the quarter of the width of the block. And that will become more apparent when I do the voicing. I'll explain all that. But I've set this quite accurately at a quarter, and I won't need much adjustment on this at all when I voice. If you do this accurately, and I know what the cut up is on these, I do the same for all these continuo 8-foot flutes. So again, referring to the spreadsheet in front of me. Now on the back of it, I'm just marking where the ears go with the marking gauge, and then I'll score that line, and you'll see why in a minute. So when I put it on the router jig, the excess will just fall away. So as always, getting smaller and smaller. Now we're on to the router jig. Now this is a homemade job. This jig has made thousands and thousands of pipes over the years. It's basically, it's set in the jaws of the vise, and it's just 2 extra vise jaws basically, held together with 2 dowels, and there's a movable plate either side, plates either side to set the ear width. And then I just gradually take the material away. Don't try and take it all at once because you want to get a finish as possible. So I'm going to work my way down to the thickness I need. And just checking the thickness of the lip at the end. And you'll see why I've scored the back of the plank in a minute. There we have it. Now I can just break away the excess back to that score line. And voila. Just the edges need to be cleaned up with a knife. And that thickness of the lip is basically, I do it by eye, but it's not any particular thickness, it's just what looks right. And then just clean up the bevel, any router marks there are. And clean up the lip. And that is done. Now you'll find, if you see quickly, there's a pencil line. I've taken the bevel a little bit further from the pencil line just because I will be planing half of a millimetre or a millimetre off the sides when I clean the pipe up. So we just work our way through all of these. This is the next octave up, and you're adjusting the side pieces for each octave because the ears will get thinner as the planks get thinner. So there's. And now we can glue the front and the backs onto the sides. The sides are cleaned up on the planer, and we're going to go through and mark what's called a step down. Now, not all builders do this, but it's something I was taught to do, so I continued the tradition. I'm not exactly sure what difference. I think the pipe will speak better generally, because that little edge to the block there will be just softened with a tiny chamfer. So what we've got to do is to put a belly in this. What we mustn't do with these bigger pipes is have a concave pipe, because it will not speak. You'll have problems with speech. And so what you do, you put a belly stick around the middle of the pipe, which is about 1 millimetre, 2 millimetres maybe with the biggest pipes, over the size of the width of the block, so that you've got a slight belly on the sides. This will help it to speak. That will be knocked out once the pipes are glued up and we've cut the ends off. So that's the front dry fitted with a nail to fix it in place, and the same with the back. Now these planks are up 1 or 2 millimetres over width, so take into account the belly. But I will plane these flat, they won't have a belly. The belly will just be on the inside, not on the outside. So again, preparing the clamps before you put any glue on. And then we're going to size, like we did with the sides, we're not going to size the inside of the fronts and the backs for the same reason. We don't want them to leak. Now, I've had a comment in the previous part one of these pipe making videos of whether I have had a problem of the planks bowing as you resaw them. You can avoid that to a certain extent by resawing them on the bandsaw, because it doesn't heat up so much as if you were doing it on the circular saw, but I don't tend to have a problem. If you can do it so the grain is as near to quarter sawn as possible, so the grain is adjacent to the width of the... I want to explain that later, but I don't tend to get a problem. The only problem I get is when I put the glue on one side of the plank, and that will inevitably warp or bow the plank slightly, but it's not a problem at the mouth end, because that will be glued up onto the block, and at the mouth, because you're removing so much material around the mouth, I don't tend to get a problem with that warping. So the only place it does bow is up at the stopper end, and the stopper tends to take into account that when you fit the stopper. So we've got quite a lot of clamps on here. I mean, and the more the merrier, really. You can't have too many clamps, I find. You just got to make sure you've got a nice seal all the way along. These bigger pipes take an awful lot of time, much longer than the smaller ones, obviously. Down there is bottom C, done. Then tenor C next. Exactly the same process at the belly stick. Sizing planks. Using staple gun rather than nail to position the plank so it doesn't move when you clamp it. The position the plank, I think I said. It doesn't move when you're gluing it. So the first you do up these clamps in order. You do the end and the mouth, and then you work your way along. But there's a different angle. So the end one first, and the one at the mouth, and the one in the middle generally, and just work your way along. You get quite sore fingers doing this, doing up the wing nuts. And then you get to the little ones, which are really fiddly. So now once that's dry, once the glue's dry, we're going to cut them to length. They're about 20mm, 3/4 of an inch over length at the moment. So you're getting rid of that sacrificial spacer block, turning it over and just taking using a little steel rule there to move the pipe up by about 0.5 mm, just clean up the other end. Bottom C on the 8-foot. Then there's the steel rule going in the other foot to cut off the end of the block, just to clean it up. You're taking very, very little off that end. So we work our way through. This is the bottom octave of the 8-foot. Checking the spreadsheet for the lengths. And there we have it. Now the bigger pipes can be cleaned up on the planer. And this little planer is another one I inherited with the workshop. It's a lovely little machine. The bearing's a bit worn out, but actually you can get a beautiful finish off this. Just a traditional 2-knife block. ideal for this. And I go back to the beginning of the first video making the pipes. The planks were slightly over thickness, so now we're just taking half a millimetre to a millimetre off to get them down to size. Now, what I mentioned at the end of the last video as well, on the pipe video, was the drilling the holes for the feet on the little pipes. I couldn't do for the top octave and a half or so because they were too small. So now with the sides on them, I've got more material around the block, so I can drill the holes for the smaller pipes for the pipe feet. This is just done with a block and with a piece of wood attached to it at the right angles basically. So once we've done this, we move on to making the caps. So the caps go over the top of the blocks and will be routed out with a groove, a sloping groove, to throw the wind across the top of the block and over through the mouth to produce the sound. So we're using the recycled mahogany again for this, which is perfect. We're cutting them to length first, ticking it off on the spreadsheet. We'll get 4 at the bottom pipe, 4 pipes will be one thickness, then the next 4 will be a different thickness, and so on, right up to the top. So these are for the bottom octave of the 8-foot. Then we turn them over and we just cut them to width. Again, referring to the spreadsheet and just knocking on the rip fence, tiny amounts each go. Again, very laborious, but it's worth taking your time and getting this right, because if you get it as accurate as possible, then it's much less cleaning up when it comes to planing the sides of the caps to fit the pipes. And there are the finished cap, not finished, but machined caps. So then we want to mark the line for the router jig. I'm going to use the same router jig as we used for the bevels on the front planks. I'm just marking where I want the router to stop, so that I can line that up with the line on the router jig. This will just get smaller and smaller the higher it goes. So now we're back on the jig, but with a stop on it, so that we don't go all the way through. We stop, you'll see. Just cut the flue first, because we want that as clean as possible. And there we go, that stops at the line, because it's lined up with that line on the rails of the jig. So then now we have a wind wave for the wind to go across the block, up through the foot, across the top of the block, and over the mouth. That will be that slope there will be probably scalloped out a little bit during the voicing process, but we'll come to that. And this is the smallest cap I can do on this jig. There's another octave and a half or so to do by hand. So we move on to the tiny ones. This is getting very fiddly, so the glasses have come off for this. So we score the edges, and we just going to chisel it out. There's no other easy way of doing this. I've tried to think of easier ways to do it with a machine, but actually sometimes you have to resort to hand tools. Now this is scalloping it out, which I will do with the bigger ones when it comes to voicing. It's just another way of slowing the wind down across the block. Rather than scooting off a flat surface, it's got to move over the slightly curved surface, which will just control the wind a little bit better. So there are the caps scalloped out. Now we've got to just drill the holes for the screws to attach them to the block. So again, I'm using the drill with the countersink attachment on it. Basically, I've got all these dimensions on the spreadsheet again. I will have marked a line with a marking gauge where these screws go. So I can drill it and do the countersink for the screws at the same time, which obviously saves a lot of time. Right down to the little ones. The little ones, the drill won't fit in they're too small to fit into the chuck, so we have to use a little drill vise. And countersink them separately. We're just cleaning the exit hole there. There's a little one. So now we attach the caps to the pipe with the screws. So we mark where the holes are. Tap, tap. A pilot hole. Clean it up a little bit with the sandpaper and plane the size down to fit the pipe. They're just very slightly over width. Again, all these dimensions have come off the spreadsheet, so this is why you want to try and make the pipe as accurate as possible, so that all the dimensions on the spreadsheet work. And then just take the edges off. And that's bottom C done. So we just work our way through now, getting smaller and smaller as usual. I can't find any decent posi screws or crosshead screws this small, so I just resort to the good old-fashioned brass countersunk slotted screws. This is much more traditional, and they look great, but obviously a lot more expensive. So that's that process done with making the caps and the bodies. So the next process will be making the stoppers and the There we go. The first sounds. The stoppers and the pipe feet. Just one more for good luck. Again, I can't reiterate enough really how time-consuming these pipes are. They're great fun, and they're very, very satisfying, especially when you get them on the voicing machine and start speaking. But they are very, very, very labour-intensive. But the challenge is to make them, not only make them speak, but I think to make them look nice as well. That's, they look good inside the organ. So we'll just finish cleaning this one up and move on to the next video. This is going to end here now, and I look forward to welcoming you back for the stoppers and the pipe feet.